Hey, this is Kenny from Kenny's Audiophile Record Reviews. Thank you always for being on my channel. For those of you new to my channel, if you find this content informative or educational or useful, please like and subscribe. I really appreciate that. In this video, I'm going to get into 5 things or 5 mistakes I've done during my record collecting journey, or 5 things that I regret during my record collecting journey, things I wish I would have done better. I'm gonna get into that in this video. Please leave some of yours in the comment section below. But my list is not in any particular order. It's just 5 random mistakes I think I made during my record collecting journey. And I'm gonna get into 5 starting right now. And the first one I'm going to start with is condition. Early on in my record collecting journey, when I started taking it a little bit more seriously, maybe in the late 70s, maybe a little bit before that, early 80s, I was not as discerning about condition as I am now. Now the way I like to buy records in terms of condition is more on an elite level. Whereas back then I was a little bit more liberal in terms of what I would accept condition-wise when I was as a teenager than I am now. And you always want to, in my opinion, build a collection, whether it's you're collecting Hot Wheels, stamps, coins, baseball cards. Condition is king, in my opinion. There's some rare occasions where, you know, you're going to accept a subpar condition record if it's something that's extremely rare. Let's say you see a 1959 Miles Davis kind of blue promo record or something like that. Okay, I'll take that one, you know. But now I'm more discerning about the condition of the records now versus then. I wish I was more selective, more picky and choosy as a teenager when I was collecting records as I am now. And that's something I regret. I really do. Because like I said, condition is king. It means everything when you're building a record collection, especially when you're buying used records at estate sales, thrift stores, you know, and you know, discount stores. You just want to be wary of the condition of records because, you know, as I always say, at least to myself, in general, what you see on a record is what you hear. Now, that does not always hold true, though. I've gotten some records in the past that had some visible scratches on it and played fine. Conversely, I've got some records with hardly any visible scratches on it. You hear all these pops and ticks. So sometimes it's a misbag regardless. However, I wish I was more picky and choosy in terms of the condition of records back then as I am now. Another issue I had during my record collecting journey is when I'm out at thrift stores, estate sales, whatever, looking at records under the proper light. A lot of times at thrift stores, the lighting is kind of subpar. So what might visually look like a mint condition or a VG++ condition, and you get home and looking at a proper light, you see all these fine scratches on the record. When you look at it home under stronger light, you got to be careful about that. At minimum, I like to, before I purchase a record, let's say at a thrift store, I like to look very closely with my cell phone light. Also a good thing to do, take a small flashlight if you know you're going record hunting, especially at some of these thrift stores. But at minimum, I like to use my cell phone light to see if I can see some of the scratches on the surface of records, because like I said, sometimes what you see is what you hear, so you got to be careful about that. And I wish I would have done that earlier in my record collecting journey. Another thing that was a huge mistake, and I wish I would have embraced earlier, was mono records. And now don't get me wrong, I purchased mono records throughout my record collecting journey only because I could not find a stereo counterpart in great condition, so I accepted the mono record, not knowing at the time how great mono records sound when you listen to them properly, in my opinion. I last year, as I posted on this video, purchased a mono cartridge, And listening to mono records with a mono cartridge really just changed my mind in terms of mono records. I'm going through my collection and finding all these great sounding mono records. And I wish I was more into listening to mono records properly with a mono cartridge. I know a lot of people like to use that mono stereo switch on their receiver or preamplifier. I did a comparison between using my mono cartridge versus a preamplifier with a mono stereo switch. I was using a Mcintosh C28 preamplifier with a mono stereo switch. That's my second best preamplifier. My main preamplifier is a Passlabs X2. But the Mcintosh, the mono stereo switch compared to the mono cartridge sounds better to me. It's more detailed, more expansive, more dimensional than a mono stereo switch in that particular preamplifier. But I wish I would have been into mono records earlier and played them properly with a mono cartridge. A lot of records, let's say in the mid to late 50s and early 60s, and their stereo counterparts, let's say in the late 50s, early 60s, they were still figuring stereo out. And you had some of these records that had a strict right sound and a strict left sound with no information in between. And I think in those cases, it's really cool to investigate the mono records and listen to them properly, because oftentimes they can be a joy to listen to. I know the sound stage is a lot narrower than the stereo stage, but within that sound stage, a smaller sound stage, there's a lot of depth, dimension, and beauty, and timbre, and depth. It's amazing how much a mono cartridge can open up that sound. A good example of that is when I was listening to Tony Bennett record on a stereo cartridge versus a mono cartridge, and the mono cartridge sounded far superior than a stereo cartridge. I was listening to this on a stereo cartridge, a Rega P8 turntable with a Apheta 3 cartridge. And I was listening to this record on a mono cartridge, inexpensive mono cartridge. I believe mine is Audio-Technica AT33MONO. I believe that's a model number. And that cartridge, in terms of playing mono records, beat my Rega P8 turntable with a Apheta 3 cartridge. The mono cartridge was attached to a Technics SP-15 turntable. Mono sounds spectacular during that era on a lot of records. An example of that is this record here, this Ahmad Jamal record. This is stereo and mono. The mono beats the stereo. Like I said, they were still figuring out stereo during that time. And oftentimes during that era, those mono records sound sweet. They're really beautiful, very dimensional within that smaller space, I must admit. Another thing that I wish I would have embraced earlier was discogs. I really do. Not to put my collection on discogs. That's not what I mean. It's that wealth of information on discogs. I just really was into discogs the last 5-6 years. But in terms of a database, in terms of the lineage of pressings, which was the first pressings, and investigating matrix numbers when they have thrift stores or estate sales, and see where they sit in terms of that pressing history of that particular album is very important, because oftentimes, but not always, oftentimes the first initial pressings are the best sounding pressings. Not all the times, but often they are. Example of that is this mono version of Witch's Brew. Now I have the Analog Productions acoustic sound stereo version of this record. It sounds awesome, but this sounds great as well. But this is a RCA living stereo, not living stereo because it's mono, but this is RCA 1S pressing, or earlier pressing, and it sounds great, but not getting into discogs earlier, and that wealth of information really was a mistake on my part, in my opinion. Another thing I wish I was into earlier was into separate phono preamps, because that gives me the freedom and flexibility to upgrade that section of my system without making a wholesale change to a receiver or a preamp. Now that's some workarounds, I guess. You can use I guess an auxiliary input of your receiver, or preamp if you want to use a separate phono preamp. But I wish I was into a separate phono preamp earlier. I think I've had mine for the last 17, 20 years. Mine is a Whest SWH-EST .20 phono stage. Simply sounds stunning, but I have the option of upgrading it if I want to. I really love my phono stage, and I wish I was into separate phono stages earlier. Another thing I wish I was into earlier, and I think it's a mistake, buying reissue records earlier, even if it was like during the classic records era. This one I bought at a thrift store for $6. This is a classic records version of the Timeout Dave Brubeck Quartet. They said play $6 for this at a thrift store. I wish I was into buying reissue records earlier in my record collecting journey, because I missed out on some great legendary pressings by great legendary mastering engineers like Bernie Grubman or Kevin Gray. I wish I was into them early, because I missed out on a lot of stuff. I mean, don't get me wrong, God bless me with a lot of reissue records, but I wish I was into it then. Now granted, I had some earlier mobile fidelity pressings, but those were not bought new. They were bought at thrift stores back in the day. I was not buying them new. So I wish I was into reissue records earlier. Another thing I wish I was into was YouTube. Now, I've been into YouTube for a long time, but I'm talking about in terms of watching videos from record collectors and audiophiles. That, for me, that's been the last maybe 5-6 years. But there's a great community on YouTube in terms of wealth of information, people doing great informative videos like Norman Maslow or the Audiophile, and many other folks on YouTube, men and women who do great videos, and it's very educational, informative, and I learn a lot by watching other people's YouTube videos. And I wish I would have embraced that earlier in my record collecting career, because of the wealth of information that it provides. But those are just a few of my mistakes I made, or some things I wish I would have done earlier during my record collecting journey. Please leave some of yours in the comment section below. I really appreciate it. Please like and subscribe. I appreciate that as well if you find this content helpful or informative. Thank you very much for viewing my video. God bless, strong love. And always remember, keep the peace worldwide.